Good evening, everybody. Good evening to those here in Israel, watching live or in person or on Zoom, and good afternoon to those watching in North America. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a Senior Fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to another of our English events. We have these regular events either in person or on Zoom, or both, as in this case. And we are frequently talking about issues pertinent to the current situation, of course, also Israeli history and the Jewish world, the wider Middle East. And we are always very keen to help promote and publicize new books that are that we think are will be of interest to our audience. And I think certainly in the case of this book, will be also inspiring and give us a sense that despite the current situation or situations often feeling rather bleak, things are not all bad because we have a lot of great people doing great things in the Jewish world. I'll just speak a little personally that when I was in my 20s, which was some 20 odd years ago, I was involved in a couple of projects that were for young Jewish leaders or young Jews or young something. And one of these groups, I was actually talking about it with a friend earlier who I met on that program just an hour ago. One of them, I included people up to the age of 40, I think, to my horror, that it was called young Jewish leaders. And I was sort of 24, 25. And now that I'm quite a way into my 40s, I would dearly love to be eligible for a young something or other. The contributors to this book, some of whom we'll hear from this evening, are all actually young. They're in their 20s, and at a time, as I said, when I think we could all do with some hope, I think they provide it, because they are, for all that we read and hear, and perhaps know personally about the crises of Jewish identity, of young Jews in North America and Europe, assimilating away from the Jewish people or turning away from Zionism out of ignorance and a desire for membership of the progressive club, never particularly progressive, but there you go. These aren't just young and proud Jews, they're young and proud Zionists. And as Einat Wilf writes in her very laudatory praise at the beginning of the book, Zionism has become shorthand for a confident Jewish identity. And I think that is exactly what it was always supposed to be in all kinds of ways. So it's an inspiring book, and you'll have a chance to buy it afterwards, so please do so. We'll look forward to hearing from some of the contributors a little later, as I said. We're also going to hear from everyone's favorite Israeli spokesman, the owner of Israel's most famous eyebrows, Eylon Levy. And also someone who has himself greatly contributed to the cause of Zionist thought and advocacy over the years. I hope you'll forgive me if by over the years it's clear that he's not part of the young Zionist voices. And that's the editor of this volume, David Hazony. He's an award-winning editor and translator and author. He's director and Steinhardt Senior Fellow at the Z3 Institute. And his newest work, Young Zionist Voices, which we're going to be hearing about, brings together the next generation of impassioned Jewish leaders. His 2023 collection, Jewish Priorities, 65 Proposals for the Future of Our People, brought a remarkable array of new essays from across the Jewish world, and we actually launched that here last year. He's the former editor-in-chief of the journal Azure and the founding editor of The Tower. His book, The Ten Commandments, was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award, and his translation of Uri Bar Yosef's The Angel was a winner of the National Jewish Book Award. He's previously edited 2 anthologies. He has a PhD in Jewish philosophy from the Hebrew University. He lives in Jerusalem. He's a good friend. David Hazony.
So first of all, thank you, Paul. And I want to give really deep thanks to Paul, both this year and last year when we launched Jewish Priorities. The Begin Center has, in my view, become perhaps the single most important English language venue for thought, for ideas, for new books. It's really made Menachem Begin proud. So thank you really to you and to the whole Begin Center. I also want to thank the Z3 Project, which is the co-host of this event. The Z3 Project, which some of you may know about their big, amazing conferences each November in Palo Alto, California. But they do tremendous work creating multiple channels and platforms and strategies for new ideas for the Jewish people, new ideas in Zionism, new directions and scholars and thinkers. And so I'm very grateful to them. And I'm grateful to them because they also asked me to come on board this year and to start a new institute called the Z3 Institute for Jewish Priorities. And you're going to be hearing more about us as the months and years go by. How many of you, if I may just ask, show of hands, how many of you were not in Israel on October 7th, 2023? A fair number, probably about a third. Come on in. So I was here. I live here in Jerusalem. But I had this book launch happening 2 weeks later in North America for Jewish Priorities. And I retell the story too often, but October 7th happened. I experienced it like most Israelis. And I naturally, like any paranoid book author, assumed that because my book was coming out, of course, the world turned upside down and everything would be canceled. And in fact, the opposite happened. We had 15 events scheduled across North America for Jewish Priorities. And every single one of them, they called me up and they said, listen, what we're going through now, we really actually need this event. We need something to bring the community together. So on October 19th, I got on a plane and really encountered for the first time how American Jews in particular were experiencing October 7th. And it's obviously great similarities to what Israelis experienced. It was trauma, it was shock, it was horrifying, but also some really important differences. For Israelis, we got hit and almost in an instinctive manner, we came together, mobilized, fought back, but also mobilized for civil society, mobilized for ourselves through our political disagreements to the side for now. For American Jews, it was a different experience. For diaspora Jews in general, I heard the word lonely a lot, afraid a lot. American Jews woke up each morning kind of like when you're going through a personal tragedy that people around you aren't, and you leave the hospital where you've dealt with horror and walk outside, and how come the birds are singing and how come people are acting as though it's a normal day? That's what American Jews saw every single day when they were dealing with the repercussions of October 7th. And they were afraid. They were afraid because instantly anti-Semitism became very real, very palpable, especially on the campuses and especially in the urban centers, but not only. There was some mobilization for Israel, but there was no real sense of, wow, we are at war. We're under attack. How do we come together and fight this off? This is late October, early November. That came later. But then I started noticing something really interesting, which was that everything I said was true, except for among young people. I kept noticing at Harvard, at UCLA, at University of Pennsylvania, at Columbia, all these nodes of resistance, these individual or small groups of Jews, Zionists, proud Zionists, who decided they were going to fight back. They were going to stand up. They were going to claim their right to be there and claim their right to be proud Jews and proud Zionists. And I thought, wow, and together with the folks at Z3 and with the folks at Wicked Sun Books, we realized that this isn't just a scattershot, phenomenon. This is actually a movement, or at least it's potentially a movement. But in order to help it sort of express itself in a coherent way, we were going to pull together 30 writers, 31 in the end, to make this book, Young Zionist Voices. This book came out just 2 months ago. That's how long it takes to make a book. And really, it was an eye-opening experience for me. It was really kind of amazing to meet these writers, to read what they had to say, to explore their own thoughts, not just about anti-Semitism and not just about, pro-Israel advocacy, but about what it means to be a Jew, because these are the questions that now are being asked, that they have to ask when you're gearing up to fight a very difficult battle. In particular, I noticed 3 insights that were sort of common themes across the book. And bear in mind, there are Israelis in this book, there are Olim in this book, the majority are young Jews. Everyone's under 30, the majority are young Jews in the United States, but there's also Australia, there's also the UK. And what seemed to repeat itself in these common themes that kept turning up, I'll focus on 3 of them. One is that it's much better to fight back than to flee. Okay, the instinct ingrained in centuries and centuries of diaspora Jewish life is to freeze up, to figure out where you're going to escape to. And a big debate emerged relatively quickly about the elite campuses, the elite schools. Are we going to just stop sending our kids to Harvard and Columbia, or are we going to send them there and teach them how to stand up for themselves? So a lot of these writers went with the second option. Adela Kohav in particular wrote a very article called at our elite campuses, don't flee them, stay back and fight. The second theme that emerged was the centrality of Israel to their Jewish identity. But it wasn't Israel as, the sports team that you root for, the flag that you love, and it wasn't Israel as the refuge you run away to. On the contrary, for a lot of these writers, Israel represented the Jewish backbone, the source of inspiration that gives them the strength to stay in America, on the campuses, and fight. They looked at Israel as an exemplar of Jewish strength and pride and courage. And the third theme, which I think was perhaps even the most interesting for me, my field is Jewish philosophy, so I'm always kind of looking for this kind of thing, was kind of a critical look at the way they'd been raised, at these certain cultural elements within Jewish education, Jewish identity building, that put too much of a focus, in their view, on victimhood, meaning Holocaust education in particular, and the flip side of victimhood being anti-Semitism and how to fight it. Quite a few of the writers in this book said, that can't be what being Jewish is. We have a 3,000-year history. We have a land. We have a people. We have literature and texts and stories. And how can you tell me that to be a Jew is to be slaughtered, or to be a Jew is to be attacked just because you're Jewish? That's the core of it. So there's a certain exploration taking place among younger writers that I don't think we had when I was growing up, which is, but if it's not those things, so what is it? Let's see if we can find it. And a number of the authors wrote about the land of Israel and their experience with it. A number of them wrote about Torah. But there is a search taking place today for a new set of core ideas that define what it means to be Jewish in the coming century. And I think that's amazing, because I think that really will become the strength of the next generation. I would love to introduce to you, before I bring them up on the stage, I want to say that in addition to the 4 contributors to the book, sorry, 5 if you include Eylon Levy, who wrote the foreword, the 4 young Zionist voices who will be here, there's 2 more who have joined us. Where's Izzy? Where did Izzy go? Oh, there you are. Izzy, you got to raise your hand higher. Izzy Lyons is here. Eli Ackerman is here. But I'm really, really, really excited to hear from, first of all, I'm going to call up Ofer Chizik. Come on up. Ofer is a journalist, a Reform rabbinic student at Hebrew Union College. a PhD candidate at the Ruderman program. That's,
I go where I'm told.
Yes. A PhD candidate at the Ruderman Program for Jewish American Studies at the University of Haifa. He also writes and edits for Yediot Achronot, focusing on foreign news, world Jewry, and interfaith relations. Ofer served as the spokesman and media director for Hoshen, the education advocacy organization for the LGBTQ plus community in Israel, and as the spokesperson for a Knesset member. Ofer was also a reporter at Galatz Radio, where he received 2 Galatz Editor-in-Chief Radio Awards for excellent journalistic work. Thank you, Ofer. Avi. Next is Avi Gamulka. Avi studies history and geography at the Hebrew University, serves as an advisor to the president of the World Zionist Organization. He has previously served as a policy advisor for the Director General of the Prime Minister's Office, as spokesman for the Minister of Tourism, and as a foreign affairs correspondent and senior news anchor for Galei Tzahal. I missed a joke. Noah Shufutinsky. Noah is a Jewish educator, lecturer, musician based in Bat Yam. He earned his BA in Judaic Studies at George Washington University, where he was heavily involved in Jewish life and Zionist activism. Noah is also known by his stage name, West Side Gravy. As an artist, he fuses his passion for Jewish culture and history with his lived experience of growing up Black and Jewish across the United States to write and produce hip hop. As an educator with Stand With Us, he speaks about topics regarding Israeli and Jewish history, connection to the homeland, and how anti-Semitism affects Jewish people around the world. And finally, Maia Zelkha. Maia is a writer living in Jerusalem. Her work has been featured in publications such as the Jewish Book Council, Parabola, Vision Magazine, and the Times of Israel blogs. She is also the founder and editor-in-chief of Yad Mizrach, a brand new magazine of contemporary Sephardic and Mizrahi literature, arts, and culture. I'm really, really, really glad to have you on. And now I would love to welcome, Paul said it better than I can, but certainly someone who has made more memes than all of us combined, Eylon Levy, former spokesman of the Prime Minister's office during the war, and now he heads up the Citizens Spokesperson's office. I don't have it written down. What's the exact
No, we're going to have to change the name because no one can remember it.
But thank you, Eylon. Eylon's going to take it from here. And I want to thank you all for coming one more time, and have a great evening.
Thank you, David. Right, since we're having a conversation about Zionism in Israel, let's do this in Hebrew, right? This is part 2 of a conversation that began at the Z3 conference in Palo Alto in what feels, Avi, like it was 2 years ago, but it was apparently only 2 months ago. Having a conversation with American Jewry about what Zionism means for them. And it's a very different conversation from what it means for us living in Israel, although most, if not all of us, straddle the line between the diaspora and Israel. For American Jews, the question of Zionism, it's an idea, it's an abstract, it's an ideal. The question is, what is my relationship with Israel? My relationship with Israel is Bituach Leumi keeps sending me letters, right? We have a very different relationship with the Israeli state, and a very different relationship with the dilemmas that are involved in what it means to run a functioning country here. We're finding it now, especially today on a very tense evening when people can be forgiven for being glued to the news as we're awaiting news about whether a hostage deal is going to come through. And we know that we desperately want the hostages to come back. We also know and are honest amongst ourselves that the price is going to be absolutely horrific. And even if we have to pay it, we're being blackmailed and we don't know how we're going to deal with the consequences. But these are real life dilemmas that we are having as Israelis that often seem a lot more abstract to people whose skin is not all the way in the game, even though American Jews are essentially and increasingly finding that they are tied inexorably to what is happening here. But still, it's different from being here. So I want in the discussion that we have today to have a look specifically on the local Israeli context. about what it means to be a young Zionist voice, how it's different from what's going on in America. Let's try as much as possible to keep the answers relatively succinct, because that way we'll be able to get through more questions and have a more engaging discussion. Maia, I want to start with you. You speak in your entry in Young Zionist Voices that you felt pressure to try to fit yourself into American race theory, that they come up with this structure about this is what race is like and trying to fit in their story, and essentially you just gave up at some point and said, no, I don't belong within your division of the world. And I wonder whether you think that's part of Israel's difficulty, part of the difficulty of being a Zionist voice, not just a young Zionist voice in today's world, that our story just doesn't fit into any of the templates that other countries are telling about themselves and about identity.
Well, I think that, well, first of all, I've only been living in Israel for 2 years. I made Aliyah a year before October 7th. So I feel like my experience has been very much like divided in half, like 1 year before October 7th, and 1 year after. I think that the understanding of race and color and borders is obviously much different in Israel than it is in the United States. And I think that it's interesting because I see in Israel, there's so much different Jewish diversity that exists here. There's, you know, I'm an Iraqi Jew, my husband is a Kuchini Jew, we live in a Yemenite moshav near Beit Shemesh, where we're surrounded by other moshavim with lots of different ethnic origins and everything. And there's so much of that diversity of ethnic origins and borders and color. But at the end of the day, all these people, if you ask them, oh, is your homeland in Yemen? Is your homeland in Iraq? Is your homeland in Kuchin? It's a ridiculous question. Their homeland is in Israel. And I mean, I feel that way. I don't think I ever felt growing up like I was an American. I just always felt like, yeah, this is kind of where we live, but Israel that's our real home. Certainly, I think my family members, they fled from Iraq in the late 40s, early 50s. They certainly don't feel a sense of, you know, we were in Iraq for thousands and thousands of years, but that's not our homeland. It's a very, so there's kind of a deeper understanding of that, I think, in Israel, that people they're attached to their sort of diasporic identities, but there's also a really core, almost like spiritual, I would say, even among secular people, sense of belonging to this place just in an ancestral way and everything. So that's something very interesting that I've noticed just living in Israel in the last 2 years. And it definitely, like after October 7th, I've experienced it in a new way, definitely.
And Noah, this is a dilemma that you struggle with as well in the essay that you write. And your solution is not one of arguments per se, but of tone and approach, and say that actually the attitude that young Jews need to take around the world is one of being unapologetic. And I wonder whether you think, especially in the wake and in the grips of everything we're experiencing now in Israel, that an attitude shift, something that comes and says on the table, hey, world, we're keeping you safe, we're unapologetic, we have nothing to hide, you owe us one. That's the attitude that we need to hear, especially from Israel's youth.
I think the answer to that is absolutely. I think that not only does that affect Israel's internal standing, you know, with groups one and amongst each other as far as building that unity among citizens here, but it also reverberates throughout the world. When you have American Jewish youth or South African Jewish youth or Australian Jewish youth who come here, and they're still coming here, I talk to them on a weekly basis, my work with Stand With Us, you're interacting with people who are in this country who are meeting Israelis. And every single time they go back abroad and they have to get in these situations where they're put up against anti-Semites and people with misinformation and disinformation regarding Israel, the strongest thing a lot of times we'll urge them to fall back on is it's not even just your personal story or your family story you've been told generation after generation. It's what you experienced yourself. And for someone to go abroad and be able to bring with them, unapologeticism, not just coming from something that's ingrained in their experience in the diaspora and what they've been taught in a Jewish day school, but it's a personal experience they've had with an Israeli. It makes all the difference. I mean, you could look at every single conversation or negotiation, not even argument per se, but you could look at it as a negotiation. And in general, you're not supposed to go into a negotiation with your compromise, right? You go in with what your core beliefs are. And from there, you can maybe work and get to a compromise if you have a partner across the table who's willing to get there. And the same is true for our identity, right? We're not going to compromise who we are, thousands of years of history, in order to fit ourselves into a political box. And the best way to get to that position for youth is to come from a place where they've seen that firsthand. And as young Zionists in Israel, we have the opportunity to set the tone, the way that young Zionists who actually made the jump originally to follow through on that thousands-year-old dream to get back to this land and made the jump and set the tone for Jews around the world.
Avi, I'm going to give you a chance to apologize to the audience or explain yourself.
I'm so sorry.
Because your chapter in the book claims we are Israel's greatest generation. And I wonder whether members of the audience who are from a different generation might think that's a bit cheeky.
Boomer bashing is a professional sport. It's not for everyone. And so it has to be, you have to engage with it delicately and lightly. No, in all seriousness, when I approached my chapter to the book, one of the things I wanted to do is step back and look at what ties together our generation in terms of our outlook on life. One of the things I came back with is that the world had the benefit of about 70 or 80 years or so of experiencing the world as progressively getting better. That over time, there is a determinist march of history that just marches towards something inevitable that is better. And while today may be difficult, hope is around the corner. It's a mindset that culminates in the Fukuyama approach of the end of history, but it's much broader than that. And when I looked to my left and to my right, and I read through some of the essays in the book, trying to find my voice, one of the things I came back with was that part of our generation experiences the world in an opposite way. We experience the world, those of us who've grown up in a post 9/11 climate crisis world, where the world is getting hotter, we are getting poorer, we are a generation that's more depressed, more anxious, we have more reasons and causes for despair. And once you recognize that as a problem, how do you move forward and what's your solution to that? One of the things I decided was the need for a cause. And so whether or not you're thrust into the need for a cause like October 7th, nobody asked us, any of us, whether we wanted to rise up to any occasion, but that was thrust upon us. And so Zionism at its core becomes the cause, not just as an ideal to work towards, as you mentioned in your opening, as an abstract idea of something we have a relationship with, but as bituach leumi, as current affairs, as politics, as culture, everything. Every time you open the newspaper when you're sitting in Israel, that's your form of Zionism. Every time you get up in the morning with the belief that tomorrow can be a better day, not worse, that's your own version of Zionism.
And so why are you, I say you because I don't count as a young Zionist voice, why are you Israel's greatest generation?
We're Israel's greatest generation because we have no other choice. We're the generation that's going to rise up from the ashes. We're the generation that'll correct the wrongs. We will be the ones to hit the reset button. We're the ones who have shown up already since the beginning of the war and will continue to do so, whether it's on the front lines or on campuses or anywhere else around the world. And so whether we like it or not, that's the title we have to roll with.
Ofer, I want you to you can be critical about Avi's thesis, because I think that in many ways, Israeli Jews and American Jews are victims of their parents' success. What do I mean by that? American Jewry spent a long time saying, we want to fit in, and therefore our Judaism is just a matter of religion. We're just like everyone else, we just have different faith practice. And then what happens when religion goes out of fashion? You're left with dwindling synagogue attendance and nothing really else to capture that sense of peoplehood and identity. And you, in your essay, Does Liberal Judaism Have a Future?, point to the victims of the success of Zionism that says, we're just a nation just like any other, and then stripped actually from a sense of deeper understanding of text and history in a particularist culture, as if all Zionism is to have American Idol, but in Hebrew. And so I want to pose that question to you that you ask in the essay. Does liberal Judaism have a future, both in the United States, but also here in Israel, actually, where our task is to find a narrative that is deeper and more binding and goes beyond the raw bare bones of what today's secularism is? Do you think it has a future? What role do you think it has to play in binding this generation?
Firstly, just in one word, I want to say thank you for this venue because my grandfather was an Etzel warrior, so it's very exciting to me to be here. So thank you. And to your question, I think there is a future, and I think there must be a future. I think for people like me who are both liberal but also want a religious life, a Jewish life, there is no other option but liberal Judaism. So we must make a future. We need to make the adjustments that are needed. We need to put the boundaries to what liberal Judaism is. We need to fight both the too much conservative voices that are preventing us from being liberal and also fight the voices that are preventing us from being Jewish. We need to define what Judaism is and what does it mean in the liberal sphere. But does it have a future? It must. I wouldn't be involved in it if I would have thought ever.
And do you think, I mean, you're saying it must, but are you sensing an appetite within Israel? Are you sensing an appetite among secular youth for discovering some other form of Jewish identity in a way that American Jews actually might be able to contribute to Israeli Jews? And vice versa, are you sensing that among American Jews there is a desire for more of a sense of national peoplehood that Israeli Jews can contribute to them?
I think that there is a hunger. Ever since October 7th, there's more and more. I think that it's something, it's hard for a secular Israeli Jew to be attracted to liberal Judaism that is reform or conservative or something that is not of the nature of the country. I think that as Israelis, we have some sort of like a boundary that we need to go through in order to find a Jewish identity or in order to find a liberal Jewish identity. Israelis do not know that there is something that's called Reform Judaism. My personal experience was that before my bar mitzvah, my parents were considering, where will we go and do the bar mitzvah? And they were thinking, well, we won't go to the Reform synagogue because it's pricey. And that is all that we knew. We did not know what are the values of Reform Judaism. We didn't know the fact that there is a Reform synagogue in town, that are rabbis with we can speak and see if it fits. And we only knew that it's pricey. And why is it pricey? Because of political sphere and everything that's coming from the political funding. But what I'm trying to say is that really there is a hunger. And I think that on both ends, both the Israeli youth and the American youth can make, American Jewish youth, can make really, really important meaning from diving into their Jewish identity if they try to.
Let's give him a round of applause too. Everyone else go.
Can I steal 30 seconds?
Go for it.
I want to use this time to throw David under the bus.
Typical Israeli chutzpah.
Exactly. I want to throw David under the bus quickly because in addition to Eli and Izzy, who are sitting in the audience, there's a third young Zionist voice with us who made Aliyah yesterday and landed yesterday. Josh Feldman, a round of applause.
And on the topic of making Aliyah fresh off the boat, there's something I sensed in all of your essays. I'm going to sound like such an old man now. I got to write the foreword for the book because I was too old to be included in the main entry. There's an idealism. I can sense a certain glisten in your eyes, a sense of mission and purpose and big picture that I identify in myself when I made Aliyah 10 years ago. And I feel that I've lost in time. I think that in the last 10 years of living here and my relationship with Israel becomes the mundane day-to-day, I've become jaded. And as they say in Hebrew, tzini, I've become cynical. And maybe the war changed something for me because suddenly I found a sense of purpose and calling and mission. But many Israeli adults don't have that glisten in their eye when they talk about Israel and our national mission. And I think we need it, because if we don't have it, it's going to be very difficult for us to live in a country where we wake up every morning at 3 o'clock in the morning because the Houthis are firing another ballistic missile at us. And I'm wondering what you think the role should be of young Zionist voices in Israel and in the diaspora, where maybe they have that glisten in their eyes more than Israelis do, to reignite that sense of wonder, that sense of big picture, vision, calling, purpose. How do we reactivate within the average citizen in Israel that same sense of wow that he feels when he steps off his El Al plane on his Aliyah flight?
So, as someone who's been here for the large number of years of 2.5, I can for sure relate, even just, from your first experience with an annoying bank clerk, right? Or why does the bank close at 1 p.m. and then reopen later and I missed, You can relate to these little mundane things that you spoke about that get rid of that glisten little by little. And it's something that other people notice. For me, I go back to the United States and then the glisten returns when I come back to Israel, if I'm being honest. But I know that that's not the case for everyone, and it's not going to be for people based on their personal experiences. But I think that that collective nature of who we are as a people has to bring it back. It has to do with the fact that you walk the streets here and you talk to people in my neighborhood. They can be from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Georgia, Russia, Georgia of the United States, not as much in my neighborhood, I'll say. And they all have a different story for how they ended up here. And a lot of times we think about, diaspora, America, Israel, right, as this kind of dichotomy. But there are so many other stories of Olim who American Jews come here and just take for granted, oh, the Israeli guy. And in reality, there may be one generation here, and they still have that glisten in their eye, right? Because they've understood, going back to this idea of like Jews and this situation in the United States being victims of their parents' success or their parents' generation's success. A lot of times that's what results in sort of this understanding of, oh, we kind of take certain things for granted. But there's people all over this country who don't take things for granted because they're so close to things that force them to flee. And again, we shouldn't look at Israel as just that refuge, right? But for those people also, it wasn't always a refuge. It was the place that they desired to get back to no matter what, right? Even if life was comfortable in other places. And right now, American Jews for the first time are seeing that life is not necessarily so comfortable in the United States. And we need to keep that sort of glisten alive for them when they get here by showing them that you have the opportunity to make things better the same way previous generations did. Because life for Jews who fled horrific circumstances also wasn't so great when they first arrived in Israel. But because of that glisten that they kept in their eyes is why we're still here today and why we have a country.
When George Bernard Shaw wrote that youth is wasted on the young, he meant that as an insult, as a slight, meaning that we're mindless, that we're brainless, that we don't know what's good. But I think in a country and in a land where everybody walks around with 3,000 years of history in their head, and everybody thinks that they know everything that's going on and has been going on and will be going on, everybody has that whole timeline in their head all the time. There's something to be said for being young in the sense that you're not weighed down by mistakes or by perceptions of previous generations. And I think there's just something to be said for that to be inherently a young voice. And it's not to say that people don't inevitably become jaded. I'm not sure people can hold on to that glisten in their eye that you mentioned. It might possibly be that that's an inherently young quality, and there's a reason why young voices should have a seat at the table consistently, because one day these young voices will become the middle-aged voices and then the old voices, and then people will take our place, and that's just the way of the world. And it's our job to remember that youth and that youthful glisten, and to make sure that the people who come in our stead have that opportunity as well.
Ofer?
I partially disagree with Avi because I think that I think that we see that among the young generation today, not all of them have this enthusiasm in their eyes. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is coming both from the end of Israel and from the end of the diaspora. In Israel, we haven't done what we should have. We haven't reached out enough to the diaspora and asked, what do you need? Not what we want to present to you as the story of Israel. And well, basically, we want your money, so please contribute. We didn't do the work to keep the community. We send shlichim. We do some stuff, but we don't do enough, and we don't consider enough the voice of the diaspora in the state of Israel. But from the side of the diaspora, we haven't raised our children with enough connections to Israel. We told them a story, but we didn't teach Hebrew, at least in the latest generation. We don't always send them to the Jewish school because it's very expensive. It's not always possible. And also it's connected to the shul. If we don't go to shul anymore, then why is it relevant to our lives anymore? And so we find ourselves with a generation that a lot of young people among it are not connected to the state of Israel. And the truth and the answer to that, which is pretty much also my answer to the question you asked me beforehand, is what we need to do. We need to start building a new generation to do the educational work and the field work with the current generation, both in Israel and the United States mostly, and the diaspora in general, in order to create or recreate Zionism.
Maia, do you still have that glisten in your eyes? And what do you see among your, was it Yemeni neighbors?
I was going to say, I don't exactly have a solution to it, but something I've noticed living in Israel, especially my husband is Israeli, so I feel like I'm very
We're all Israelis
immersed.
now.
Well, born in Israel. That's what I meant. My husband is born in Israel, and so I'm very immersed, I would say, like in the Israeli bubble in Israel. I think Israelis collectively, they just take for granted Israel. Like they don't understand what the miracle and the absolute mind blow that it is that we live in Israel, that there is Israel that exists, that Jews live in Israel, that we have the opportunity to come there. I think like when I came to Israel and I made Aliyah here, I felt such deep inspiration and purpose and meaning in my life, just literally making the act of coming here and living here. And I think, I mean, I even sometimes like I'm driving around with some of my Israeli friends or with my husband, I see Israeli flags just lining the highway, Jewish stars, or we'll drive into a parking lot and there's a big Chanukiah or menorah like statue there. And I just think to myself and I say, it's so insane that we live in Israel, and they just laugh at me, like, because it's something that they're so used to. You know, it's not even something that they really think about. I think
I still have moments where I hear someone in the shuk talking Hebrew and I turn around and go, they're speaking Hebrew. And then I remember where I am.
Yeah, like I think after October 7th, I think Israeli society was shaken in a way where they kind of realized, oh, okay, this isn't just like an obvious, like Israel, the existence of Israel isn't just an obvious like thing that is just, you know, will be continuous no matter what. You know, that was the first existential war that happened in Israel since Yom Kippur, I think. Or tell me if I'm wrong, since Yom Kippur for decades. And I don't know if it's existential, but I would say in the early days of October 7th, it did feel existential because of, you know, just the chaos that was happening in the early days. It really was just, you know, anarchy, really. Like there were all the state functions that should have been there helping Israelis, like the protocols, everything failed that day. And the only thing that really was keeping everything together was just the Israeli people. And so I do know what you're talking about, that sort of, like Israelis don't necessarily have that sort of spark or that glimmer that Olim have. Olim who have even been living here for a very long time, for decades. I've seen Olim who've been living here for 30, 40 years, and they still have that glisten in their eye because they know what it's like to be in a country that you can't just totally be your authentic Jewish self and you're a minority and you sort of have to present yourself to the world in a very conditional way. But I do think, I think October 7th sort of shook Israelis a little bit from that veil.
You want to chip in?
I think another thing, like adding on to that too, you're talking about Israelis taking certain things for granted. I think that people who are born and raised here, there's a lot that we can do, and also me as being part of this society now, to make things easier for people when they make Aliyah to stay. There are too many Olim who I know who come here, having had a great experience on Birthright or Masa, and hoping for Tel Aviv Masa Birthright round 2, and in the moment that they have to face reality, and oftentimes it's not like, oh, you have to face reality, it's things that should be easier. They turn around and they go, and they lose that, glisten in their eyes. That being said, for me, I can say that I've had days like that, and the thing that brings it back to me is when I go home and I see my daughter who's a few months old, realizing that she is the future. Like, she's literally the youngest Zionist voice. I was joking around about this earlier, right? She's not here right now. She went home because
Second edition.
Second edition. But she's the first generation in probably thousands of years on my side of the family to be born here in this land. She's never going to have to go to a Jewish school and end up with an anti-Zionist Jewish professor who snuck in. It's not going to be a reality. And on the other side of things, she's never going to go into a synagogue and have people try and explain things to her because look at this brown girl, she doesn't know anything. And that's what the Jewish future is. So when you teach this young generation, and we can impart on them, of people who are making Aliyah, that this is our future and we have to commit to it, and that commitment looks like building your roots here. It looks like having a family, having a job, that even on your darkest days, it's something that's gonna remind you, this is something that wasn't possible in the past, and this is that dream that we prayed for, or if you're not religious, that you strived for in a whole bunch of different ways for thousands of years.
Maia, you said that many native-born Israelis don't have that glimmer of optimism in their eye, but there's something that diaspora Jews don't have that Israelis have. The spirit of courage that we saw on October 7th. Maybe they don't have it because they have not been tested like young Israelis were tested on October 7th. And we don't know how they would behave if, God forbid, they were ever put through that trial by fire. But one of the projects that we're working on at the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office is to try to take that spirit of courage and use it to inspire other young Jews around the world to stand up to bullies. We have here in the audience Tal Segal and Katie Aryeh, who are two of our Gen Zionist interns at the Citizen Spokesperson's Office, who are trying to build right now what I'm calling the Gen Zionist Hero Project. In my own foreword, Old Man's foreword of the book, I talk about this being not Gen Z, but Gen Zionist, and that being a Zionist means standing up to the bullies. You don't let them call you names or push you around. You stand up for yourselves and for others and for your fellow Jews. And what we want to do is build a program that encourages Jewish schools and youth movements and Hillels around the world to adopt fallen Gen Zionist heroes from the October 7th war and use them as role models for young Jews to say, you have people who are larger than life, just a little bit older than you are. I think that Omer Nutra should have a classroom in a school in New York named after him. I think that Anna Shapira, who bravely threw those grenades out of the rocket shelter on October 7th until the last one took Hirsch's arm and his life, should have a prize for excellence or volunteering named after him, and that schools should use these fallen heroes to inspire the youth. And we want to build an educational program that will go together with a plan that will have a class, a prize, a week of volunteering named after these young heroes. And we're wondering what to put in that program. What is it that young Jews need to be taught? Is it lessons in courage and anti-bullying? Is it about leadership? Or is it that what they need strengthening is that sense of Jewish solidarity, a little bit of history about how throughout history, Jewish communities have always been there for each other and helped each other in times of trouble to stand up against the bullies. So I'm wondering, how would you use the memory and the legacy of the fallen young Zionist heroes of this war to inspire young Jews in America and around the diaspora to stand up for themselves and for others?
All I can say is that I think American Jews have an obsession with everything that we're not. And they have an obsession with fighting against sort of these portrayals of everything we're not. And I think—
What do you mean?
You know, different lies about Jews, different anti-Semitic tropes, or certain, tropes about Israel, lies about Israel. There's kind of like this thing of like, hey, we have to fight against it. We're not this, we're not this, we're not this. And I think if they put that same amount of energy into everything we are, that we come from a rich 3,000-year-old history, we come from poet warriors, you know, we have a warrior lineage. I think that is something that is more conscious. I mean, that's something that is present more in the Israeli consciousness, less so in the American consciousness, probably because it is in the diaspora still. And there is, you know, David mentioned earlier, there's kind of like this really deeply ingrained narrative about like exile and fleeing and all this stuff. And I just think there needs to be a shift in how Jews like just discuss like being Jews. I think the idea of you know, bringing some of these fallen heroes from October 7th like to the forefront of, you know, Jewish American consciousness in my generation is an amazing idea, because I think that just as American Jews kind of have that glimmer that we keep talking about Israel, that maybe Israelis sort of need or need to recognize and be inspired by, I think Israelis have a toughness and just the ability to improvise, just, you know, time after time again in situations of extreme danger and or just needing to come together as a country, as the Jewish people. I think that's something that American Jews really, that is a lesson that they really do need to learn if there is a future for Jewish life in America.
Interesting. So you're saying that within the dynamic of flight or fight, what the young Zionist heroes of this war have to teach American Jews is stop running, stop flight, right? Stop and fight. Interesting. Anyone else have ideas? Ofer.
In an interview that I've had with Rabbi Angela Buchtel about 2 weeks into the war, she told me that what has started to shift, it was like really the beginning of the war. We saw a lot of parades and protests for Israel in America, vigils, the collection of money. In any event, when she tried to explain it to me, one of the things that she said was that there started a shift with the judiciary overhaul, that in the year before the war, people in America started seeing a different Israel, seeing the hundreds of thousands of people rushing through the street, demanding justice, demanding democracy, demanding a state with civil rights for every human being, is something that they could connect with. And in America, where most of the Jewish community is from the liberal side, I believe that this is a part of the story that we need to tell also with these fallen heroes, to show the world that those are not people in against what they're being told. Those are not people who are trying to murder or hurt anyone. Those are just people who are trying to keep their family safe, keep their home safe. And I think this is the story that we need to tell the world, and we need to tell those young Jews around the world, because what they see in television today and what they read in the media today is that Israel is a state that is trying to mass murder. They do not know the story that's actually happening, and that is the story that we're trying to tell.
That's a fascinating perspective, because sometimes I feel that within the diaspora, we spoke about Israel being discussed as an idea, as an abstract. It's a thing. It's a real place. These are real homes. There's real families, real houses that need defending, not some abstract thought about whether we should in future have self-determination, a real place that needs defending. Okay, so to help make it more concrete, the understanding of Israel as a concrete place. Any other ideas? Avi?
I would briefly echo what Ofer was saying, in that I'm not sure I feel comfortable preaching from Jerusalem to an American Jewish community on how they should be educating their next generation of Zionists. Not sure that it's our job, nor am I qualified to do that as someone who's maybe not born, but definitely bred in Israel.
We're not preaching, but we have, I'm thinking of experience that we can share. I think American Jews have a huge amount and a tremendously rich perspective to share with Israeli Jews. And you see it when, from your perspective of liberal Judaism, secular Israelis go abroad, and for the first time, they're shocked by the pluralism of religious life. But by the same token, we have a lot to share as well. And so I'm wondering, what is it that we want to share?
Which is why I want to echo what Ofer was saying. It's our job as Israelis, and everybody on the stage is to work towards a more perfect union, for lack of a better term. It's our job to make Israel a better place, a place that inspires hope, a place that is, a source of pride.
Okay, but I'm talking realistic. I'm kidding.
Hope, that's all we have. Zionism is hope, and Zionism is working to make Israel a better place to live, whether it's in the minutia of the day-to-day experience of Olim, and whether it's fighting for rights in the streets and for a better judicial system.
Yeah, but hope we heard from Rabbi Amichai Freeman in Palo Alto is optimism plus a plan.
Optimism plus a plan. No, you want to take? Yeah.
Mr. Gravy?
So I think that you actually brought Mr. Gravy's perfect West Side Gravy. I'm going to talk a little bit about music for a second. So I have a friend who survived Nova, and I knew him because in my old neighborhood where I first made Aliyah to, he was a musician. He's a fellow musician. We worked on music together, and was missing for a long time, and found him, and thank God he was okay. And his story is that, a few months after, after going through everything that he went through, he was back in the studio recording songs, and he released a song about what happened to him at Nova. And I think that that's not just his story. There's a ton of people who were there who share. I mean, I'm going to talk about music because it's relating to me, but in every aspect of education, whether it's formal education or informal education, whether it's math or language arts or actual arts, there's places for us to input our story because we belong. And these examples of these heroes, that's for the taking, right? That's the people that are the role models and the future role models for this next generation of Jews in the diaspora. Maia, you wrote about our existence being resistance, and that's something that really hit me in this book, because it doesn't need to always look like a concrete plan that's talking about, refuting disinformation and being obsessed with combating the narratives of the things that we're not, but it could also look like the fact that this friend of mine is a musician and he's still out here releasing music despite all the hate comments he gets just for being Israeli. And I'm gonna, we're in Israel, so I could be his name is Magen. So he had a song literally called Nova by Magen, and he's releasing a bunch of music coming out. And I'm gonna be spicy, we're in Israel, I could say it. It's ridiculous that at my little brother's Jewish day school, there are people who are still listening to Kanye West, but they've never heard of this guy. It's ridiculous that there are Jewish people in the music industry in the United States that won't dare take a step near any artist who says anything about Israel, who says any lyric of Hilo Be'ivrit, even in Hebrew at all, but they're okay turning a blind eye and saying, we need to take Kanye West to the Holocaust Museum. It's a shame. What we're doing is we're depriving, in a very pragmatic way, we're depriving the next generation of cultural symbols and cultural heroes and cultural role models, and they're choosing or being forced to end up following people who, more often than not, dislike us. So that's a pragmatic way that we can actually put this into practice, is finding something, no matter what subject it's in, looking at this generation of Israelis who are standing tall and standing resilient in the face of everything that's going on, but still holding on to who they are and the different aspects of their livelihood or their passion, and giving that to the American community and in general the diaspora community.
Fantastic. We will take all of that on board as we consider how to build this plan to inject a little bit of courage and inspiration in young Jews around the world. Should we take some questions from the audience? What do you think? Yalla. Don't be shy. Sorry? Well, least Israeli audience ever.
First of all, I really enjoy the forum, and all of you. I'm going to attempt to buy the book and read all the articles, especially Eylon Levy, all your hasbara. Thank you. This is my question. 2024, which just passed, saw a record number of Israelis making Yerida, more than any other year in Israel's history. What's your message to bring them back?
I think Eylon and I started this conversation in Palo Alto. It's a good place to pick up. Is about
all those years ago.
Yeah, last year. Part of the reckoning of the post-October 7th world, both in the United States and in Israel, is learning to deal with anti-Zionist voices in our midst. So the American Jewish community is having to deal with the existence or the flowering or the building of power over the years of movements like If Not Now, and the failure of education on a magnitude that we're not familiar with. In Israel, there's a wide range of anti-Zionist voices that haven't been met with in any serious way or have been neglected as an issue. Close to a little over 40% of the incoming first grade class of Israelis in Israel it can't be categorized as Zionist in any way, shape, or form. Right? Whether you take the Arab community, or Haredi community, or conspiracy theorists, together they make up a huge makeup of Israeli society that is a prominent anti-Zionist voice in our midst. The first step, to answer your question, the first step to getting those people back and preventing more people from leaving will be a total reckoning or a complete and honest conversation, at least, with those voices in our midst. And only when we repair the Zionist narrative that we can tell within Israel as an Israeli society and the makeup of our demographics, then we can push forward and bring these people back.
Anyone else want to chip in?
This continues what you both said earlier. We need to tell an optimistic story to ourselves. I think it was Golda who once said that we are we're optimists because we have no other place to go. I think Biden keeps quoting that 42 times in his term. But really, it's true. We need to tell our story differently to ourselves. It's like what you said on the Bituach Leumi. I mean, that is what Israelis, when we grow up, that is how we view our country.
The worst institution in the country after only the Postal Service.
Well, there are also the army. There's also so many. There's so many to choose from. The Chief Rabbinate, of course. Misrad Hadatot. In any event, that is not the story we should tell ourselves. And somewhere along the way, we have forgotten, and a bit like what Maia said before, we have forgotten that we have a country. We have forgotten the 2,000 years we hadn't had a country, and what it means to live when there is no state of Israel. And those are things that we need to remember.
You know, I'm going to push back against both of you. I don't think that the wave of emigration is being driven by people who have forgotten our sense of history or forgotten our sense of national purpose. I think sometimes they're acutely aware. But the fact is, living in this country is a superhuman challenge. And, you know, I've experienced the last year as a single man, but if I had children and a crashing mortgage on top and having to deal with childcare and everything, it's really difficult here. And when Israel asks people to live here and be part of this amazing project, it's already demanding a lot from people, even before problems like the cost of living and the traffic and other quality of life issues, where people are already making a sacrifice because they say Israel is my home. But at some point, the gulf between opportunity abroad and here can become so stark that people are forced to confront those real questions about where they want to raise their families. And so perhaps the answer to how you discourage emigration is not to demand of people to make a bigger sacrifice out of some commitment to a greater sense of responsibility or vision, but to understand that the government's top priority has to be to make Israel a place that people want to live in, to build cities that are enjoyable to live in and to walk in, that provide safe and secure environments where you're not stuck in traffic all the time and where housing isn't so insanely expensive and the groceries aren't either. And that's the challenge for Israel, that Israel can't just be a middling country and it can't just be a middling power. If we want to survive in this region, we have to be a superpower. And if we want to survive despite the pressures of getting up at 3 in the morning because of a Houthi ballistic missile, then there has to be a lot else in terms of quality of life to compensate for that, because we're already asking a lot of people in terms of sacrifice and sense of commitment to the cause. Anyone disagree with me?
I agree. That's the pure core of what I mentioned earlier as Zionism in Israel is policy. Zionism in Israel is politics. Zionism in Israel
it's state building.
Is state building.
Yeah.
Zionism is an abstract theory, and you can leave that at Ben Gurion. When we talk about Zionism, we talk about making this place a better country to live in. And so everything you mentioned, from a walkable city and traffic issues to the number of doctors working in hospitals in Israel, that's our mission, is to make this place a normal place to live in.
An extraordinary place to live. Any other questions from the audience?
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Miriam, and I made Aliyah about 8 years ago from New York.
Mazel tov.
Thank you so much. So hearing that you guys came here only like 2 or 3 years ago, some of you mentioned that, is kind of cool that you've managed to sort of cultivate like such a presence for yourselves and a voice is like really, really kind of cool to hear. And I think I'm in your age range, so I'm super inspired and intrigued. My question is as follows. The book is titled Young Zionist Voices, and the 4 of you all have your niches of like different. When David was introducing you guys, it was very clear that one of you represents one sort of demographic of a young Jewish voice, and then another one represents a different demographic. And it's super cool to hear that. But there's so many voices. And in the post-October 7th world, there's so many people that want to say so much. And not just our politicians, but also people like yourselves. You all found sort of your lane, so to speak. So what would you say to somebody like yourselves, like somebody like myself, who has something to say, who has a message, who has an opinion, but doesn't necessarily have that niche or doesn't necessarily have that lane that's specific to her? I could say I'm the child of 2 immigrant parents, and I grew up in a super Ashkenormative community and a super Ashkenormative upbringing on the Upper West Side in New York, and I don't necessarily have the most exciting, dynamic, and niche story to tell, but I do have a voice and I want to use it. So I'm curious to sort of hear from you guys how you found your avenues of advocacy.
So I actually think that's a very niche story depending who you're talking to. If you go to my neighborhood in Bat Yam, that's the most niche story ever. Mazel Upper West Side, Ashkenormative, what is that? And the truth is that like there's value in that, especially being here in Israel. There's value in that. Like you mentioned, there's a lot that Israelis have to learn from those communities, because at the end of the day, we're all part of Israel. We're all part of the nation of Israel, even if we're living outside of the state of Israel. I'd say for me, it was about finding my voice as far as like how I'm gonna express this. So for me, that was always music. I always gravitated towards music since I was a kid. And the other part of it too is it not just being a response to October 7th or to the war, to the current situation, but it's something that needs to continue nonstop. And it goes beyond just responding to things, but also finding what you're proactively passionate about, what you love about Israel, and sharing it, and also valuing the fact that what you have to say is extremely niche, depending who you're talking to. I mean, at least I'm half Russian. My dad's from the former Soviet Union, and for that side of my story is not niche at all where I live, right? But for very Ashkenazi communities that I grew up in, going to Jewish day school, where I didn't know what kreplach was, I knew pilmeni. My story was niche, right? And it was figuring out, how do I express this? How do I find a community that's gonna resonate with this aspect of it, find it novel, and how do I get it out to all of them so at the end of the day, they know one another?
I think that I found my voice when I stopped engaging and I stopped trying to engage in sort of like the I found my voice when I did a deep dive into my own identity. And I don't think it needs to be niche in any ways. I think being Jewish is niche enough. I don't think you need to have some sort of special background. Like I said, we have a very rich 3,000-year-old history. We're an ancient tribe that has survived into the modern era. I think that's like pretty niche in itself. And I just think I really found my voice when I stopped engaging so much with, and I guess this is, I don't, it's a double-edged sword because it's always good to, engage with people who disagree with you and are against you and all that stuff. But I think putting more emphasis into engaging in my own community, engaging in my own roots and history, actually just gave me the confidence to sort of like put my voice out there. I don't think you need to have some sort of niche story. And I think that the idea that there are some Jewish stories that are niche and some Jewish stories that are not is just completely false. I mean, just coming from sort of both sides, my dad is Iraqi and my mom is Ashkenazi, and they both have incredibly niche rich histories and traditions and everything like that. So I would just like engage more in your community. Also, like, stop engaging so much online and engage more with people in person, because that's really, I think part of like having a voice is having a community. And that's definitely something that I think American Jews really struggle with, because there's such a assimilating Jewish community in America and in my generation and everything. So,
as someone who's born on the Upper West Side and moved to Israel, your question hits a little close to home. 87th Street, between Columbus and Amsterdam. Shout out, everybody. I just want to add, and a little bit like a broken record, return to the point about making this a better place to live in. The voice is a ways to a means. It's an emtsai. It's not the goal. You can use your voice. You can write. Sitting on a stage is nice, and writing books is important and nice, but it's not the thing itself. It is another step along the way, and another way for us to improve the world, improve the country, make better policy. It's about taking all of the Upper West Side resources that have been poured into your education and who you are, and utilizing that to make a better place, whether that's community organizing, whether that's culture, whether that's making the people around you better read, whether it's correcting people's grammar, whether it's being a soup Nazi. It's about making this a better place. It's not about writing books.
There is this saying, I think it's in the Mishnah, and correct me if I'm wrong, המציל נפש אחת כאילו הציל עולם ומלואו. If a man saves one soul, it's as if he saved the whole world.
המקיים נפש אחת.
Sorry?
המקיים נפש אחת.
נכון, תודה. וסליחה. And this, I think, comes to say to us that every human being and every soul on this earth has a full story to tell. The only question is, how do you tell it? And when you tell yourself that you have no niche, then you have no niche. But I think you have many, many, many niches. You just need to tell them to yourself. So my advice to you, how do you do that? Today, when you go home, before going to sleep, write yourself, or at least begin, because it's long to do it. You can also do it tomorrow. But basically, go to the computer, open Word, and write in 1,000 words or 500 words the narrative of your story. What are the main events that led you to where you are today? What are the values that stand behind your choices? And you have a story to tell. You made Aliyah, for God's sakes, you came to this country. There is something that led you here. There is a story that you can and want to tell. So first of all, tell it to yourself. And when you have a story you've told to yourself, you could spread it to the whole world.
What a beautiful message. Let's take, I think, got time for 2 more questions. And let's make them 1 question per person, not a part A and part B.
So I'm looking forward to reading your essays. What is one piece of Jewishness, Jewish history, culture, literature, that makes you proud and that you could share with the young Zionists that we're talking about? Because I'm concerned that we're seeing a move focusing back on, they tried to kill us, they hate us, and so we should be proud to be Jewish. And so I would be interested to know, what are those things and how can you share them out?
That's quite a non sequitur. They tried to kill us, so therefore let's be proud to be Jewish. Okay, how do we, what is it in our Jewishness that should kindle a little bit of pride?
So I'm gonna take it back to music again. Ever since I was a kid, my parents, before Shabbat came in, they would always put on some kind of Jewish music CDs. And I think it's amazing.
Don't give away your age.
I think that it's amazing. Everyone do this for your kids. I've already started, but my wife is putting Persian Jewish music, so it's different. But I think it's amazing that no matter if you're listening to music played on a clarinet, or a duduk, or an oud, or a balalaika, which we had on our mantle, and my dad gave it away, I don't know why, the same exact musical scale is used. That has nothing to do necessarily with, they tried to kill us or whatever. It's something that's very niche, but for me, the fact that you could turn on music from all different groups of Jewish people from the diaspora and it still has this Middle Eastern component, if you're looking at traditional music, is special. And that kind of shows a history of continuity, and it could talk about, okay, what did we get through in order to preserve this? But that linear story that we've all kept through music, for example, that's something that inspires me, that makes me proud. Just to hear something that's familiar and that Jews from around the world can kind of combine their styles and make cohesive music. If you look at like Israeli music today, that represents an entire culture, and people abroad, Israelis, they hear it and they know if it's Israeli, no matter what kind of subgenre it's drawing from.
Ofer?
Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote on Brit Goral and Brit Yehud, basically trying to explain if the Jewish people was a people because it was forced into being a people, or is it a people because we have something to offer? And I think that is the exact thing. We have something to offer. We have thoughts to offer. Ever since the beginning of time, from written things in the Bible to Talmud to the ideas of social justice in the modern Judaism in America, we offer the world values and ideas and laws that are continue with us up until today. In researches that I dealt with, we see it in debates on slavery, for example, how rabbis like Rabbi Einhorn in America tried to promote the destruction of slavery. We see how the very first leaders of Reform Judaism in America are talking about social justice and how this is the message that we brought to the world. So my answer to you is just go to any book in the Jewish book section and you could find there all the answers to any question in the world. And this is what we have to bring to the world.
Funny, I was going to say books. I was going to say the National Library is my point of Jewishness, but you took that. I'm going to say Tevye the Milkman is my point of Jewishness for two reasons. One, because of his everlasting optimism. Tevye is always, everybody knows, right? The Fiddler on the Roof, I think that's canonical. One, because he's always hopeful for the day he'll become a rich man. He's hopeful even though he's not youthful. He's young at heart, but especially because, for the second reason, is that he has many hands, right? He's always constantly deliberating with himself and with God and with his peers. On the one hand, this, but on the other hand, and on the third hand, and on this hand. And so he knows that being Jewish is being, self-critical about yourself, about the decisions you make, to the point of neurosis. And yet, he also knows that at some point there is no other hand. At some point he knows how to put his foot down and say, my Jewishness has its limits, it has its red lines, and sometimes I have to make some difficult decisions about what my identity includes and what it doesn't. And so embracing the complexity of the Jewish experience, or of Jewish life, and at the same time being able to limit yourself That Teva is my point of Jewishness.
There's so much work that exists of just about Jewish life and just like defining what it is to be Jewish, especially what it is to like live in the land of Israel. I think for me, I really started deeply connecting with it when I started reading the poetry of Yehuda Amichai. And thank you. Yeah, clap for him. He's amazing. And I think there's so much Jewish literature that exists that's really like looks at the Jewish question and Jewish survival and history and exile and return in a very intellectual, heavy-handed way. And I think poetry is actually, and you know, it doesn't need to even be Yehuda Amichai. It could also be Shmuel Hanagid from, you know, medieval Al-Andalus. They're basically saying the same thing, despite, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years separating them and you know, borders separating them. I think that I think poetry is a very interesting document for Jewish collective consciousness, that I think it offers something a little more spiritual and emotional and something a little more like ethereal that can't be quite like over intellectualized, just about the Jewish experience. It's also something that's kind of like, if you get it, you get it. Like if you're a non-Jewish person reading like Jewish poetry, you're gonna have a very different experience than being a Jewish person reading poetry. So for me, I think like when I think of what sort of stuff should I read as a Jew, I think poetry.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. One more question, please.
So we spoke a lot about how we want to see a better future in Israel. And I wanted to know, like, what do you want to install in the future of Israel as a young Zionist?
That's a good question on which to end. What do you want for the future of Israel?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the.
I'm asking, like, you personally, what do you hope to change in Israel for the good?
Apart from Bituach Leumi.
Better cities and more walkable cities. I'd say cultivating a culture of responsibility and taking responsibility for one's actions, not a culture of Yebeseda, but a culture where actions have repercussions and people know how to lead through taking responsibility for their faults and for the great things they do.
I think a sense of community, to recreate that spirit that it doesn't matter. I think we're all Jews, we're all living here, and we should stop. We do it a lot on the liberal side, but I think it applies to all. Searching for the bad. There is bad, there's a lot of bad, but in a way to find the place where the community is the most important thing and not what we feel towards what is happening.
I think that there needs to be vast improvements as far as institutional support for soldiers in this country. I think that if you look at soldiers in this country, I grew up as a Navy brat.
And reservists.
And reservists, right? When I say soldiers, anyone who's serving in the military at any point. I grew up, you know, as a U.S. Navy brat, and there's a very small percentage of the U.S. military, U.S. population who serves in the military. Here, everyone does, and as a result of that, you have this amazing culture where when my older brother was a lone soldier, the random guy on the side of the road is gonna offer him anything that he needs to support him. You're a soldier, you're here, you're serving our country. But the fact that there are times where that's necessary because institutions don't necessarily do their job or fulfill their responsibility is ridiculous. So I think that the specific issue that I want to fix is trying to create a situation where there is more institutional support, whether it's for people after they're released from the army or even, in many cases, having resources while they're serving.
I don't think I'm so interested in the changing, and I'm more interested in the continuing. I think, you know, there's so much that is happening right now in the Jewish world, both in the diaspora and in Israel, activism and writing amazing books and, you know, different conferences of how are we gonna, you know, what does the Jewish future look like, and what's this turning point of Jewish civilization right now? I think the most powerful thing that can be done right now is just having a Jewish family. I think that is, you know, seeing someone who is just having a Jewish family right now, I think that is arguably one of the most powerful things that you can do to continue changing Jewish civilization in a positive way, and just continuing our peoplehood.
Everyone, let's give our young Zionist voices a big round of applause. And I'd like to invite David Hazony, the editor of the outstanding collection Young Zionist Voices, to come and say a few words to wrap up for us. David.
Thank you all. Thank you, Eylon, and Ofer, and Avi, and Noah, and Maya. And thank you really for coming tonight. I just want to say one little thing. I know a lot of you are watching perhaps on Zoom from around the world. We talked about Jewish culture, Jewish peoplehood, Jewish soul. We have to also remember that there are, at any moment, communities around the world that need to feel that they're supported by their people. I'm thinking right now specifically about the Jewish community of Los Angeles, parts of which are going through another hell after we all went through something terrible last year. We need to always keep in mind our fellow Jews around the world. And I'll just, again, thank you, Paul, and thanks to Z3. I don't know if you want to say a few final things. I'm going to be in the back with the books, signing, and perhaps maybe Eylon will spend a minute there too. And there are a lot of us here to sign your books. So thank you all for coming.
But really you need to buy the book in order to get it signed.
I will just close to say, firstly, thank you again to everyone, to our entire panel, to the wonderful, incomparable Eylon Levy and David Hazony. Buy the book, guys. As you can see, Dara Horn's quote, fantastic news, the Jewish future is in good hands. I think that's very clear from what we've heard. So yes, thank you, everyone. And anyone that's not on the mailing list for the Begin Center that wants to be in, hear about the English events that we have, drop me an email, paulg@begincenter.org.il.